boldly engaging the mindless propaganda of our time, apparently with reason. This is Rage of the Age.
This is Rage of the Age, and we have with us today a sought-after behavioral scientist, speaker, and recognized leader in human motivations and behavior change. For 20 years, he has worked with global companies to apply behavioral science principles to drive change in their organizations. He's also the co-host of Behavioral Grooves podcast. I want to introduce to you today Kurt Nelson. Kurt, welcome to the show.
Hey, it is fantastic to be here, Philip. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, so you're a professional head shrinker, and you get people to do what others want them to do.
If only that were the case.
You help companies make workers work harder or something.
Yeah, so I'm a behavior. I call myself a behavioral scientist, and behavioral science is really it's this integration of psychology and sociology, neuroscience, anthropology, all of these, anything that has to deal with why people do what they do. Mm-hmm. And basically, what we're trying to understand is what are the reasons why people do things, and how do you, and in my work, then I try to take that and say, all right, so here are the reasons why. So what are the systems and processes that we can put in place in organizations to kind of influence them to do that? This idea that we have these magic powers of being able to, I'm going to be able to just switch somebody's switch and all of a sudden they're going to be able to do whatever I want them to do. If I could do that, hey, I'd probably
still
be
in the lab working on it, but not right now, right?
Exactly.
I know. Exactly. I poke at you with a stick a little bit in humor, but I have a fascination with psychology.
Yeah.
My wife has a degree in psychology, and I'm still recovering from that. From how she probes me, or whatever. She's gotten milder on it, but I've always, there's a fascination to it, mainly because of the humanities side. And the thing you mentioned is humans aren't predictable. I mean, and of course, there's been very draconian application of behavioral science into getting people to be certain ways, and it's never really worked. There's an element to humanity that's just unpredictable, spiteful, even. I mean, defiant to a way.
Well, I will. So first, just responding to your wife and different things. My family it feels the same way that you do about me, right? My kids are going, "Are you using that psychology stuff on us again, Papa?" And it's like, all right, you caught me. So yes, we know that, and we're obviously not that good at it.
Yeah.
But to your point, one of the pieces that behavioral science shows is that we're not so any individual typically isn't predictable. What is predictable and what science and research shows is that we have general tendencies. There was a famous behavioral economics book by Dan Ariely called Predictably Irrational. And basically what he was doing is that looking at a number of different quirks that we have as humans, where from a classical economic perspective, we should be doing X, but yet we almost always do Y, right? There are these aspects where, hey, if I was to be the perfectly rational person, then I should pick this behavior. Let me give you an example. So there's a game called the Ultimatum Game, and it's one that behavioral scientists and psychologists play with people, and it has two people, right? And so one person, basically you give them $10. One person gets to say, hey, we're going to split this $10 and I get to determine what the split is. The other person gets to say yes to that split or no to that split. If they say yes, both people get whatever that split was. If they say no, nobody gets any money.
Oh,
and it's just one time, right? So there's not this learning and going back and forth. Right. And what a classical economics person would say is, look, it doesn't matter what you offer me. If you offer me $1, I'm $1 better than I was before. But, so we should accept that. We should accept 50 cents. We should accept a penny, right? I mean, because a penny is better off. We're a penny off, better off than we were before, but we don't. And typically what the research shows is that it's about $3, about 30%. And they've done this with, $10, $100. They've done it in other countries where, $100 is more like $1,000.
Right.
And it holds true. And for some individuals, it's actually 50-50, right? And this gets into this concept of fairness, and we want retribution and various different aspects. But this is a really interesting psychological phenomena because, again, according to a classical rational person, shouldn't matter, right? I'm never meeting this person or going to interact with this person again. This is a one-time economic deal. I should take whatever is offered to me, and yet that's not the case. Now, I'm sorry to keep going on, but I will offer a different perspective on this too. Is there's another game that's called the Dictator Game. And in the Dictator Game, it's similarly set up. There's one person who gets to determine a split, but the other person has no say. They just they have to take it, right? And again, classical economics would say, hey, give that other person as little as possible.
That's possible.
And yet people tend to give 20 to 30%. So we are altruistic from that perspective, that we're not all just, trying to be retributional people and give back, but we actually do have, positive intentions and want to help other people in various different pieces. So that's just some of the different things from a behavioral science perspective. And I those are the pieces that I love, is trying to get underneath, some of the factors of why we do what we do.
You definitely highlight the frustration of the intention of the Enlightenment to work by logic and reason, and reasonable gentlemen could get together and figure it out, and we'll be fine. But then you have humans, who don't necessarily take the strict logical course. Perhaps that there's other dynamics working in their life, viewpoints, moralities that affect what they're going to do.
Yeah. And so here's another example of how humans can be influenced by different things. It's called the framing effect. And basically, how we say something impacts, again, how we respond to it. And so there was a study, a university was looking to get students to register before August 1st. And so they did the study. They sent out half of the letters that said, hey, you get a 15% discount if you register before August 1st. And the other half of the people got a letter that said, hey, there's a 15% penalty if you register after August 1st. Okay?
So which works, the carrot or the stick?
Right. It's exactly that. Economically, it shouldn't make a difference. It is exactly the same cost for both situations. So when they looked at the results, when it was a discount, 67% of the people applied early. But when it was the penalty, it was 92 or 93%. Don't quote me on the exacts on that. So it was a statistically significant difference. This was a big piece. And yet, to your point, if we're rational people sitting there looking at both of these letters going, all right, you figure out how much it costs, it should not matter. But because it's framed differently, because one is framed as basically you're getting a gain, and one is framed as you're having a loss. And there's this other concept in behavioral science called loss aversion, where we tend to feel the loss of something. So if we lose $100, that is twice as painful to us as the equivalent pleasure that we get from finding $100. And so we tend to over justify and over emphasize losses and trying to stop losses as opposed to get equivalent gains. So those are, and again, I can go on. We can talk the entire time. I can just give more and more examples of this because it's fascinating.
I mean, that's what you do. You have a podcast to talk just about this very thing.
Yeah, we interview people. We interview people much smarter than I do, than I am, and get their insights, which is the wonderful thing about podcasts, right? You get to talk to all these wonderful people.
I find people smarter than me all the time. I might have to slow down a little bit and save my ego a little bit, but
so and I'm sorry, I'm you bring up a really interesting piece about ego, okay? Because again, it's one of these aspects that we've studied, and ego can get in the way of learning, right? We know that. You've just kind of mentioned it offhand, but there is a significant component. People that have really strong held beliefs are much less open to new information than others. And part of that is because those beliefs form part of our self-identity and our self-schema. And we want to hold that consistent. And so when that gets threatened, there is this that's called reactance in psychology that we actually push back on those ideas or beliefs. There's also this element called confirmation bias, which in my mind is probably the mother of all biases that we have, because confirmation bias is this piece that if we have a belief, a pre-held belief, and we get in, and our brain works at a subconscious level. So this isn't even at the conscious level. Our brain works to say, hey, I hear something or see something that supports that belief, regardless of how good that information is, that gets amplified in my brain, right? All of a sudden it stands out. There's like shining lights on it, and it says, look, here it is. If there's information out there that is contrary or maybe puts that into suspect, that belief, our brain, and again, this isn't conscious, this happens instantaneously. And so we do things. There are a couple of things. We either ignore it. There's willful ignorance. So all of a sudden it's like we can actually look at something and somebody asks us a minute later and we go, I didn't see that. And you're going, but you actually looked at that. No, I didn't. I don't, it doesn't get into our conscious thought.
Wow.
Or we have this other aspect of it, which is we look for whatever the minutest little piece that we can then discredit it. So you can have this 100-page research that shows all of these things, whatever it is, X, but somewhere there was a typo in there. And there's a typo in here. See, they obviously didn't do their research, and they
right.
It can be that little, and yet our brain works that way. And so this is a big piece in why people just feel, go back into that element. And part of it is this idea of self-identity and who we are. And we want to make sure that that self-identity is intact and is positive. And we all see ourselves in good light. Doesn't matter who you are. And I mean, there might be a few 2% of the psychopaths out there that might do it. But for everybody else, we all look at ourselves as we're good people. And that's the interesting piece of this. So.
Right. Well, the identity piece is definitely a huge part of how people, I think, analyze things for sure. Because it's like, who wants to underscore their own identity, I suppose. And maybe that explains a lot of what we they call it polarization, but I think it's just a lot of people with self-interest. There's a defense of what I don't care what I see or what you show me. You can give me a video. You can play by play. You can present your facts, and I'm, like you said, I'm not going to listen. But the minute I find something that's like so silly, aha, I knew it. There's this conspiracy, or you're doing this, or you're crazy. And it's like, what are you talking about? It's insane. So we have this madness in ourselves a little bit. How then do we proceed in, like, say things like our habits? Because that's going to be a part of our identity, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, so habits are really interesting. And to your point, identity. And there's an element of behavioral science that looks at. I'm going to digress a little bit here. There is an element of behavioral science that looks at, hey, do our thoughts drive our actions, or do our actions influence our thoughts? And that it's a chicken or egg kind of thing. And so in reality, at least from what most of the research says, it's both, right? We know that if we have strong emotions about things, that is going to, and strong thoughts about something, that drives us, right? If I have a strong goal, I want to run a marathon, right? And I know that in order to run a marathon, I got to get out there and I got to exercise every day. Well, that's going to get me to go out there. At the same time, when I sit there and I'm running and I'm exercising every day, then that changes how I think about myself. And so now as opposed to somebody who sits around the house, I think of myself as somebody who is active, and I go out and might even start identifying myself as a runner. And so just that, and again, it goes back to framing, right? How are we framing how we call ourselves and what we talk about ourselves? So So there's that chicken or egg of action or behavior, but you're asking specifically about habits. The interesting piece on habits is, and there's some really good research by a gentleman by the name of B.J. Fogg, who's out at Stanford. He's been studying this stuff for a long time, and he has this idea about tiny habits, and it's a really good methodology, because what he's talking about is go look. If you want to form a new habit, don't try to change the world in one day. Try to do small incremental steps.
Yes.
And for instance, he says, look, if you want to make a habit of flossing your teeth every night, right? I mean, we know we should do it. Dentist always yells at us for not flossing our teeth every night. All right, how do we do it? Well, there's this element of, he says, just start by saying, I'm going to just floss one tooth. All right. If I do one tooth and every night, that's fine. And the idea around this is, and this has actually been shown in research. So one tooth is so small of a hurdle to overcome, right? And even flossing your teeth really isn't that big of a hassle for people. Right. But there is this aspect called friction, and friction actually impacts our behavior a lot. So, but if we can get over that hurdle, that initial idea that's saying, oh, I don't want to have to spend 2 minutes flossing my teeth, or a minute, or 30 seconds, whatever it is. But hey, 5 seconds to floss one tooth, I can do that. So you start establishing that you're doing it. And by that time, you actually have the floss out, you do one tooth, and you go, well, I might as well do two, right? Mm-hmm. And then you might as well do, and then by the end, you have it. But that hurdle in our brain of flossing one tooth is much lower than flossing our entire, all of our teeth. And this is an interesting, weird example, but it holds true in many different situations. So this idea that you start very small, and he has a model, and it's called BMAP. Basically, behavior is determined by our motivations, our ability, and then what he calls prompts, which are cues or triggers. And there's another model I'll talk about in a second. And if you think about it, this is this concept where, all right, I have the motivation, right? The dentist is telling me I need to do this. So my motivation might be a little higher than it was yesterday, but really, is flossing my teeth one of the things I really want to get out there and do? No, it's not, right? I have the ability. The ability is pretty easy. And then prompts are a whole separate thing. We won't get there. But if my motivation is super high on something, my ability and the prompts, it doesn't necessarily, they don't have to be as high, because I'm going to really want to do it, and I'm more likely to do it. If my ability is super high on something, then my motivation and the prompts don't necessarily need to be as high, because it's super easy to do typically. And so I'm more likely to just do it, because I don't have to there's not a lot of effort into it. And then prompts are these cues, these triggers, these things in the environment that kind of remind us, oh, you should do that. And again, with flossing, it's probably when you brush your teeth. Many people have a habit of brushing their teeth. And so, I'll put a prompt in. When I brush my teeth, I will also floss at least one tooth. Okay. And go forward from there. And then there's a thing called the habit loop, which is basically, again, how habits are formed. And habits are basically formed because you have a cue or a prompt. So something triggers a thought in your head. And then you do whatever that routine is, and then you get some sort of reward. And when I say reward, it isn't always like you get, all right, thank you, you got a ribbon, for doing this, or you get a chocolate cake, or whatever it would be. It's intrinsic element. Oftentimes it's a release of dopamine in your brain, or other neurochemicals make you feel good, kind of make it all worthwhile. So if you think, they've done a lot of this work with smokers, and starting to smoke. All right, you get a cue. You're out at a restaurant or a bar or something, and that's all right. That's the cue. I smoke here. You smoke, and then you get the reward of the nicotine and everything. And that's a really hard habit to break. And so if you want to break a habit, one of the things that they've shown is that it's really hard to ignore all the triggers that are out there. And so the best thing that you can do is try to replace that routine, the behavior that you're doing, with a different routine. So again, smokers, what they say is, all right, so instead of reaching for that cigarette, try to replace that with something else. And, most
Mhm.
of the time they try to do something healthy, eat a carrot or something. But even if it's just like, carry a bunch of hard candies in your pocket and start sucking on a hard candy. That hard candy provides some reward because you get the sugar release in various different pieces of it. And so now what ends up happening is over time, that cue is now associated with the candy and not with the cigarette. And so you are much more likely to stop smoking and just, overindulge on candy.
You're listening to Rage of the Age. Rage of the Age. Politics, religion, economics, and history with a conservative bend.
So would you say that it's easier to form a new habit versus break one established?
Oh, see, this is a really tough question. Depending upon how well formed that habit is, how ingrained it is. One of the things about habits. So they hypothesize that habits and routines are formed often because our brain, which is about 2 or 3% of our total body mass, uses about 20 to 30% of our body's energy. So habits, and most of that is done with the prefrontal cortex, this part right up at the very front, which is the last part of our brain that is evolved and is really what is where our rational thinking is. And it takes up the most of that energy. Habits and routines happen in a different part of our brain typically, and they require less energy. And so we often don't even realize that we're doing these habits once we've done. And I always use the element of driving a car, right? Remember, if you can think back when you were 15 or 16, just starting to learn how to drive that car.
Yeah.
And you had to think of everything. You coming to a stop sign, you had to think about putting your foot off of the gas and onto the brake. After a while, that just becomes habit. It's just natural. You don't even have to think about it. You don't.
Right.
All of those actions that you're doing, and those are so ingrained that those would be really hard to stop. Which is like when you go over to England or one of those countries where you drive on the other side of the street. It's really hard. It's really difficult. You have to consciously think about that because our habits are such that we drive on this side and you turn, particularly when you're turning, right? Those are the things where it's an unconscious piece that you just do.
Right.
So changing a really deep held habit like that, or one that has a really powerful reward, which is what cigarettes are, those are really hard to do. That being said, starting a new habit is very difficult too, because you have to fit it into a life that is already filled with different things. And, there's research out there. There's a belief out there that is kind of permeating, the internet and just general thought that, habits take 21 days. And that's a bunch of crap.
Is that now? Because I've seen that all over the place. It's well, 30 days. I've heard if you can do it for 30 days, you're good. You're in.
Yeah, and that's that. There's lots of research that shows it's typically much longer on that, and it depends on the intensity of the habit, right?
So where does that come from then? I mean,
okay, so here's this is an interesting story. The 21 days.
Right.
21 days came from research back in the late 1950s, early 60s. Where it was a plastic surgeon who was looking at having his patients, so doing facial reconstructive surgery.
Right.
And when his patients looked in the mirror, it took about 21 days for them not to be surprised at the reflection coming back. And it was mentioned in an article or a research journal that was on that. And somehow somebody picked it up and said, "Oh, this is what it takes to change a habit." And then that got, put out there, and then it became, this is fact, and that's what it was about.
My goodness! So you just, wow, that don't even seem related to me. How did they make the connection?
I'm sure there's somebody who was looking at that and then using that as part of their evidence on something else, and then somebody else picked on that, and
confirmation bias again, I guess. That's,
well, and it's this idea that one of the things that we're trying to do with our podcast, but also I think just in general, is look, there's all of the science that's being done, and when it gets put out there, mostly by journalists or others, they take the big headline from it, and they don't look at any of the nuances. They don't look at, oh my gosh, sugar is horrible for us, and then the next time is, oh, sugar is great. Well, with that research, that they're looking at is probably looking at a very slim slice of life, or a certain demographic group, or different pieces, and this other, and so. And you can't generalize this. And this is one of the things about behavioral science, is our behaviors and how we work are based significantly upon context. What is the context that this is happening in? And when you think about that, this is some great stuff. So Michael Halsworth is a behavioral scientist who's done work with different governmental agencies. And so one of the interesting things, we talked about the framing piece before of how you structure stuff. So he's worked with city governments on, hey, we'll change this letter that goes about on tax collection, or getting people to sign up for a program. And if you change different things, how much more increase in collections do you get, or different pieces like that. And what is really interesting is, we get these things, and if you again change a typical governmental letter that is very governmental form looking and very different things, and if you make it feel more up to date, and like, hey, there's a nice font, it looks professional, maybe you're using some cool graphics in it, typically that increases response rates and gets people to do stuff, and the way you frame the words and different pieces. Well, all right, that's great. He was working with, I think it was Albuquerque, and they had some program to increase, people trying to sign up for some program. And they thought, oh, we'll just apply this over here, right? But luckily they did good science, is they ran an experiment, and they tried various different pieces. Right. The one that looked like the new professional one, all of that, it actually decreased people signing up. It backfired on them. And again, what they found is that in this context, is they thought that it was a scam piece, and so that people doesn't
look government enough.
Doesn't look government enough. It doesn't look like that. So this is the aspect of just context, and context really makes a difference in how we applying any of this stuff. And so going back to this element of why these things get into the general public, and kind of this knowledge out there, is that we often take scientific findings, which are constantly looking and changing and trying to say, all right, this works here, now does it work over in this situation? And we expand them out to generalize, and that generalization doesn't always work, and oftentimes doesn't work.
It reminds me of cholesterol. Like at one point it was like, you're gonna die, and then it was like, oh, cholesterol is actually good for you. And I'm like, well, which is it? Well, then it's like, well, it depends on the cholesterol. And I'm like, yeah. And by then it's like, I don't care anymore, because you animated it to something. It wasn't exactly that, and now I'm like, I don't even hear about it no more.
And that's exactly the problem is, right? We have a status. There's another aspect called status quo bias. See, I can tell you, I can talk about this all day.
You got it all.
The status quo bias. We are inclined to. It goes back to some of those beliefs and the confirmation bias and everything else. But we tend to don't like change. And so if all of a sudden somebody tells us, and it's new information for us, and we go, oh, cholesterol's bad, great. All right, now that becomes the status quo. I understand that cholesterol is bad. Wait, somebody's telling me that cholesterol is good? That's it's different than the status quo that I believe now. But it also goes back into this element of, well, they're flip-flopping on this idea, so they don't really know what's going on.
Right.
And this is the piece about science that I want people to know, is that, look, science is always questioning. Even, if you look Doesn't matter if it's behavioral science or if it's physical science, if it's, astrophysics. They're always looking. I mean, Newton's laws of gravity work pretty damn well across the globe, right? I mean, you can measure and predict and do all of these things that science does.
Right.
But they start to break down at really big and really small pieces. And thus Einstein looked at that and said, hey, there's something else going on here.
Right.
And so then Einstein came up with the theory of actually the theory of relativity and the second, the general theory and the special theory, which looked at that. And it's this constant questioning, constant looking at things that we're trying to do. And again, in behavioral science, it's the same thing. When we think about why people do what they do, we learn a little bit, but then we go, oh, but this works great. And then it's like, but it doesn't work here, but it works even better over here. And so it's this constant increase in our knowledge, and it gets held back because of some of these other things like status quo bias, confirmation bias. And then we just said, I'm just tired. I don't care.
Yeah. Well, it's like that with COVID, man. I mean, how many different reports have I heard? This work, this don't work, do this, don't do this. And then it's worse that you have government agencies that want to just go full speed on something unconfirmed yet because it suits their particular what they want to do. And
exactly.
Now I can care. It could be the Black Plague now, and I don't care. I'm just done with you. I'm done with everything.
And what's interesting is exactly your point, right? And I think one of the biggest mistakes, again, however you think about this, but it is that aspect of, look, we say one thing, but then all of a sudden the more information is gained, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is transmitted, by touch and different pieces. And then, so everybody's wiping down their counters, wiping down their groceries when they come home in different pieces. And then you're going, wait, that more research. And now, no, it's airborne. And so, oh, well, we didn't think about that before. Well, you said this and now this, and that's crazy. There's another interesting piece of this too, which is, again, we talked, you mentioned politicization before, right? This polarization between things. There's a thing called the messenger effect. And basically, which goes into, we are tribal by nature. This is just a human condition. It's called in-group and out-group. There's lots of research.
That's only if the other group does it. They're being tribal. You all are lost in tribalism, not us.
Yeah, which is true. That's the belief, right? Oh, I'm not tribal. You're tribal, and I'm rubber. You're glue. There you go. That's. But
that's the most profound summary. Thank you. That just really winds it up. That's the conclusion, folks.
Well, there you go. Sorry, I'm done now. I've said all I can.
That's the show.
Just one thing on the messenger effect, which is, again, like if there is a person within our tribe that is, there that we look up to, we're much more likely to believe that person. And the other piece of that is if there's a person who's in the other tribe who is an expert on something, we're much less likely to believe that.
Right.
We had Annie Duke on our show, who is the author of Thinking in Bets. She's a decision science theorist. And it's interesting because she talks about, look, I have this political belief and somebody else has a different political belief, and we can disagree on those political beliefs, whatever we want. But if that person has a really good salmon recipe, it shouldn't matter that we disagree on these political beliefs, but it does. Like, I will go.
I'm boycotting salmon.
I'm not using their damn. I'm not using her salmon recipe. It's like she's on the other side, and that salmon recipe must suck. Yeah. And that's just idiotic, right?
Yeah.
But
that's what we do. Yeah.
That's what we do. And it's really sad. And it's one of those aspects where, to your point, and I think this is a big piece, is we always point at the other side. They do this, and it's easy for us to see those because again, confirmation and the way our brains are wired, right? We talked about this. Right. It's like we push down those things that when we do it ourselves, but it amplifies those when others do it. So it's this idea of, can we stop and can we just take a moment to really put a lens on our own behavior and our own actions and our own thoughts. And, I study this stuff, and I will tell you, as much as I try to do it, I'm still human. And these things happen to me as much as they happen to, somebody who doesn't know anything about these. And it's hard. And so I have great empathy for everybody, because this is it's a strange world we live in. It's a crazy world that's changing at rapid pace. And this idea that, humans separate ourselves into these tribes and different factions, and just that we make dumb decisions on, things such as flossing our teeth or not flossing our teeth, is really, I go, well, just people be smart, and it's not that easy.
Right. Do you think there's a fatigue factor when it comes to, how can I word this, the application of science? Because like you said, science, in order to be real science, has to be able to say to itself, what I know now may be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And if I come across something that shows it, I have to follow the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
But given that we're not prone to want to do that sometimes, like say the COVID thing, we think this means something, or maybe it's this, or it's respiratory, or it's touch, or mask, no mask, 2 masks, 6 feet, 3 feet, a whole gamut of possibilities. To not science people,
Mm-hmm.
to most of the population, we don't want to wait on the experiment. I mean, especially when our lives are hijacked by the experiment. It's like, just tell me what you need to do and move on, but you're still trying to figure it out. So is there a fatigue element? And we can call that, you probably have a name for it. You probably do. But is there a fatigue element that just makes the rest of the majority of the world that's not scientific in nature, just like, I'm done with the science?
There is actually, it even happens within science. So there's a whole piece that's, and it's actually called fatigue. There's cognitive fatigue and emotional fatigue.
I knew you had a word.
Yep. Well, you said it. I just added some modifiers on it. You said the word itself.
Yes,
but
sir.
there's this element, and emotional fatigue is the one that I think is really happening with COVID, right? It is this, we have been under stress, craziness, uncertainty, and we are not good. Humans are not good with uncertainty. We want certain. We want, just tell me what to do.
Right.
Because our brains are not good. I think, our 50,000 years ago, you're living in a cave, and you're out, gathering food, and you hear a snap. Right? Do you all right, do you assume that that's your buddy coming up behind you, or is it a saber-toothed tiger? Right? And so our brains want that certainty, because it then forms, how we respond, and the amygdala within our brain really takes that uncertainty, and it causes all the stress. And so having that stress going on becomes chronic stress, which has lots of negative impacts, but it also just wears us out. And it wears us out so that you get this, I don't care. I don't care anymore. I don't care if you tell me that I need to wear 3 masks, or if I can just go out and I just don't need to touch them. I don't care. I give up. And there's this almost this feeling of anomie, this element of just like, so what? I can't take it anymore. I just don't have enough emotional bandwidth to be able to take it. And the same thing happens cognitively. And so if we get cognitive overload, there's too much information, it actually shuts down our prefrontal cortex. And so we tend to fall back on our old. So you can be having all this great information, but if it's too much information, particularly too much too quickly, we fall back into our old habits and our old routines and our old beliefs. And again, there's lots of reasons for that. It's interesting, though. You talk about this idea of science and looking at the evidence. There's a statement in science is that, hey, new science only happens when old science dies. And basically there's lots of research proof looks at, hey, new theories don't get their say until the scientists who had the old theories actually pass away.
Right.
And then the new theories can actually come up. And so there's lots of this time. And so,
yeah.
You're listening to Rage of the Age. Rage of the Age. Politics, religion, economics, and history with a conservative bend.
I agree with that. And I can imagine the thing with identity is tied in too, because their whole life could have been like they're doing the lecture circuit. They've written for all the journals. They got the books out. And now here comes this new upcomer going, well, that's not exactly true. What? I mean, you didn't just go at the science, you went at the identity, which, you have that element kicking in as well, right?
Yeah. And again, there's some interesting pieces about this, right? So one of the pieces is that this doesn't happen all the time. There are some researchers, and we actually got to talk with Gary Latham, who is in his late 70s. He was doing research in the 60s. So it's, and he's in my field. He's like this, you put him up on a pedestal. Locke and Latham did all this theory on goal setting and research.
Right.
They designed the theory around it.
Yes.
And he talks about this time in the early 2000s where there was this other work by a gentleman by the name of John Barge, who was talking about behavioral priming or automaticity. This idea that things that, like, if you hold, and this is true research, if you hold a warm cup and then you meet somebody, you like that person more than if you were holding a cup full of ice. You feel that person is a warmer, more generous person versus if you were holding a cup with ice cold soda in it. Right. And the research they did is they bringing these people in and to having them talk, and the researchers, had to pick some stuff up. It's like, can you hold this? And he basically half of them were holding warm cup coffee. Half of them were holding, this cold ice cup. And then they had them, gauged and rate how well this other person that they were talking with, how do you feel about them? And so there's these things that happen before, and they prime our neural pathways to, like, so for warmth, we associate warmth with generosity and nice and all these other things, cold with being distant and all these. And so just having that physical piece, then tying in that. Anyway, Gary Latham said, he's in this different area of science. He said, we're not letting this in. This is a bunch of crap. There's no way that we're going to do this. Right. He had his research assistant do this study. And he said in advance, he said, look, if this study comes back positive, I'll eat the paper that it's written on, right? He's so far in this belief. And the paper came back and said, nope, this is true. And then this one was like, they used, they put a picture on, so they were working with a telemarketing group, and they were asking for solicitations for donations for a university. Okay. And so half of the people got this like daily tip sheet that was just plain, and the other half got a daily tip sheet, had a picture of a woman running through a finish race with her arms outstretched. Everything else is exactly the same.
Yeah.
People that got the picture had a 40% increase in the amount of donations that they were able to get. And it lasted for well over a week. And Gary said, oh, there must be something wrong. Go back and redo it. They went back, redid it, got the same result.
Yeah.
They said, try it with a different group. They tried it with a different group, got the same result. And he said, all right, well, the evidence says this. I need to relook at it. And he's been studying this now for 10, 15 years. And he goes, still, every time I do an experiment, I go, this won't work. And every time he says that evidence points to the right thing. So,
yeah. Well, it's yet another bias confirmation that coffee's good. So that's what I got out of your whole spiel. I didn't hear nothing else. I just got coffee's good. So,
there you go. Coffee's good thing.
There it is.
Not the iced coffee, hot coffee.
You're talking about fatigue. It made me think of a whole nother direction. But to be the chronic stress that you're put into leads to a sense of apathy. I believe is what you're saying. You said anomie, but I mean apathy. I think would apply as well.
Yeah. Probably a better word. Actually,
I was thinking of my own experience and experience of others around me. When I was in Iraq with guys for a long period of time in just horrible conditions, we developed an attitude of I don't care. I mean, nothing, live, die, doesn't matter. Didn't get to eat today. Well, go figure. I mean, no shower for a month. Yeah, go figure. I mean, it came to where the only, I don't know if it was how we coped, but a sense of apathy really, even fatalism kind of kicked in. So
Mhm.
is that kind of normal for all aspects, like all elements of stress? You're dealing with stress. I mean, this could be police officers, this could be firefighters, this could be EMS, it could be social workers. Even is there a danger where you're not as effective anymore because of this
Y-
apathy?
this isn't my area of study, so
Okay, yeah.
this is more just a general sense, and so I
Mhm.
this is me talking just
Disclaimer, yes, sir. Yeah.
as a person, not as a science, because I don't know what the research says on this,
Right.
and
Okay.
so I always qualify. But to your point, I think there is something there. There is this element that, and I'll go back and I'll use my own example. So when I first graduated college, my first job was at a company called ITT Consumer Finance, and I worked in this office, and basically we gave out small loans to people who couldn't get loans anywhere else,
Okay.
and they would finance their 6 months free financing at American TV of Madison. And then what they didn't read in the small print was that you had to pay off all of that at the end of 6 months, or we'd put you on a loan, right?
Ooh.
And so at 18%,
Mhm.
and so I started and I'm going, yeah, all right, great, great, great. And then half of my job was actually calling people who were late on their payments, because we did our own collections, and then going out at the end of the month and knocking on doors and trying to collect money from people. So
Right.
I was a loan collector, right? I
Yeah.
was the repo man.
The repo
Um,
man, that's right.
and there were stories. I can tell you that after a certain amount of time, when people come in and we're signing the loan documents, I'm looking at that person and I'm going, am I going to be calling you in a month? I know I'm going to be,
Mm,
I know I'm going to be freaking calling you. You're going to, and that was
mm.
literally 5% of all people. And yet that was where my energy was going on, and that part, and the negative piece of going out and trying to get people and find them and track them down and get them to pay and all of these things. I mean, it's not anywhere near your experience or a police officer's or an EMT and people who have that life and death piece of it. But just my experience with that was,
Mhm.
I started to have that apathy, and I started to have that I don't give a shit, and I'm going to just, you know what? Fine. Go, I'll give you money, because I'll just end up calling you anyway. And you know, all of
Well,
these
because
kind of things.
I was thinking about that because I mean, I can see it being applied to so many levels. Like, well, I imagine teachers could have this.
Mhm.
ER room workers could have this. Key things that we kind of want a certain standard for the person, but because of the environment they're in, it tends to create an atmosphere of apathy. I mean, how
Yeah.
you go
So
to
I will tell you this. So I do work with organizations, and we do a lot of work
yeah,
with salespeople and different pieces. And one of the
okay,
things that we do know is that there's often this element within organizations that, hey, you get a goal, it's a quarterly goal, a monthly goal, annual goal, and then you do good, and the next year, it feels like you're punished because your goal is now even bigger, because
right,
you gotta go up, and the company always needs to grow, always need to do more.
right,
And there
right.
is this sense that, and we've seen this, and there's we've done some work with this, that you need to be able to give people a break, and they need to feel like there is this little that hey, I have done all of this work, I've busted my butt for you
Yep.
day in and day out. And if you do that, what that does is it allows people to kind of reset, because they're always under this constant feeling of stress that I have. All right, I hit this number, it was, and I worked my butt off, and oh my god, I can't do the 10-hour a day 6 days a week kind of thing in order to hit that
Mhm.
again. And it's like, next quarter, oh damn it, it's a stretch
Right,
goal, and I got to get up
right.
there and I got to do the same
Uh,
damn thing. And I think, and if you can release that for even just a short period of time, so again, to the point of allowing people to, emergency room people, can you put them on a different floor for a while that may be less stressful? Can you do different things? Police officers, put them on a different beat, whatever that would be. military, allow them to come off of that front line and get some R&R, or be stationed in somewhere else where maybe some of those things aren't happening. And again, I don't know this, but I would think that could be a really positive aspect to help get rid of that apathy. It's not saying that once you get back in that you don't fall into it quickly,
right.
But there's that moment. It's like taking a vacation. You come back from vacation, hopefully you're revitalized and have more energy.
Right. Then you walk in your door and start yelling at each other again.
God damn it.
Yeah. But I guess it goes back to the principle of achievable things.
Mm-hmm.
Things that like the sales thing you're talking about, they reach their goal, but here's another bigger one. Here's another big. It's like they can never revel in the victory that they just had. They're never reaching the finish line ever.
Yeah.
I can definitely see not caring at a point.
I mean, that's what happens. And we've done interviews with people who say, I earn a lot and it's great, but I just don't, I don't care anymore. It's not worth it to me.
Yeah.
And they just get this sense of apathy, as you said. I think that's a really great insight.
Do you work with corporations a lot? I mean, I think that's what it said in your
Yeah, so we have a communication and behavioral design agency that I run. That's called the Lantern Group, and so that works mostly with Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies, mostly with again employee engagement and motivation. So we do a lot with working with incentives and helping design incentive programs that are really not just about the money, but about giving people a sense of self-worth and various different pieces to help motivate them and get them engaged and enjoy work and go out there and want to do these things. Working with that, also working with culture and different pieces. So, yeah.
Based on your experience, what do you think the biggest hurdles are for corporations today and worker corporation relations? What's like the biggest things you're coming up against?
Yeah, I've talked with people about this. So it's this fact that many times, this isn't every organization.
Right.
Many times organizations don't view their employees as real humans. And let me qualify that. So we know that they're people, right? And they have all these pieces, but we don't necessarily, leadership within the companies aren't taking that into account when they're thinking these things. So again, like constantly, look, we have to hit this goal for Wall Street. We have to hit these revenue goals. And so for that, I need everybody to do X. And you're going, but if you keep doing that, you're going to lose your best people. They're going to leave this company and go somewhere else. And then you're going to be actually even further behind. So a better strategy is to understand, what can I do in order to understand what those people, what your employees are going through on a day in and day out basis, and build things in to make that so that they want to stay and that they want to do this space and that they're getting energy and joy out of that work, as opposed to feeling like, hey, it's just a job, I'm putting in my time. Because you're either, which is a vast majority of employees, right? There's engagement surveys that are out there, and it's roughly 20% of the population is engaged at work. That means 80% is either disengaged, which is really bad, or just, kind of as my daughter would say, meh. How's it going today? Meh. I don't know where that came from. She's 11. So
is there a serious human disconnect? I mean, there's no interaction. Is it because everything's through devices or meetings, or just?
I mean, there's all of those factors come into play, right? This element, and I think there is this distance, particularly when you get to senior management. There's this element that, again, we talked with Shelley Archambault, who was a CEO of a tech company. And one of the things she said is that the higher up in the organization that you get, the more you need to shut your mouth and open up your ears. Because there's a couple things, but what happens when you get up there is that the actual lived experience of the people at that front level is so distant from your life, just from what you do, B, from just the economic factors that go into it, C, from the people that are surrounding you. And usually there's a lot of yes people up at that top that are telling the top people what they want to hear and not necessarily what's reality. And again, this is general broad, that any individual corporation can be different, and lots of really great companies out there. But that was going to be my next
part is from what I understand and from what I've seen in various scenarios, the higher up you are, the more you're surrounded by people who don't tell you the truth. You know less and less of what's really going on the higher up you are. Even if that person wants to know, they're being fed stuff that's just not, legitimate.
There was a story, and I'm going to get these names wrong, so just bear with me. So it was Ford in the early 2000s, and new president came into Ford Motor Company. Right. And the old organization had this thing where they would do these green, yellow, red kind of. Everybody had to report up to these monthly meetings and these big projects, and they had to say, is it green? Is it yellow? Is it red? And, after a few months of this, the new president's going, wait, guys, stop. Everything is green. I know everything can't be green.
I know.
But everything you're showing me is green. Everything is in green. And yet it's not. And he still would get green because, again, the culture, what they had learned was that if they didn't have green for the past president, they got in trouble. And that's, I think that's the big piece too within organizations is the people again, going back to status quo, it's what happened to us before. It's this, we've learned how to respond. And if I bring bad news, it's blame the messenger. I'm the one, or I'm in charge of it. And it's bad news. Well, now you're going to be punished. You're going to be put in purgatory, whatever it is. And so you learn, I'm not going to present bad news. I'm going to put I'm going to put those rose-colored glasses on. I'm going to present it in the best light it is and just hope and pray that it somehow miraculously turns around or I'm out of there, or I'm moving on to somewhere else before the proverbial, hits the fan.
And I'm going to hold a warm cup of coffee when I do it. So.
And I'm going to give you a warm cup of coffee in order to make you hey, you want some coffee? Here you go. You want some coffee? Here you go. So there's one last thing on just on how people, another little piece of information that I think is again, contrary to what most people think about people liking you and getting a better feel for you. That's called the Pratt fall effect. And basically, it was the professors in the 60s, and they were doing this research. It is this idea that if you feel that you're competent, so this doesn't play in if you don't feel the other person is competent. But if you have a small mistake, people actually like you better. And so this was they did this with people going in for an interview, all right, or describing an interview. Basically, what they did is they had this perfect candidate going in, all these wonderful things. And that's it. And then they had the exact same scenario, except for at the end, and again, it was coffee. They had this person spill coffee. Oh, I'm sorry, I spilled some coffee. And people liked the person who spilled the coffee a lot better than the perfect person. So it's this idea that we need to be human, that you can go, oh, they're so perfect, I don't like them, all these kind of things. But they spilled some coffee. Hey, I relate to that. So I've been lied to on my interview techniques. I've got to revamp them totally. So, man. Kurt, it's been awesome talking to you today, man. I have a feeling that if I had more time, we'd probably go on for a few more hours on. We'd be talking about the stars or something. But you've been a really good guest. It's awesome having you. Philip, thank you. This has been fun. I appreciate it. Hopefully your listeners learn something. And even if it's just, hey, let's try to do floss one tooth, hopefully you can take something away from this.
One tooth at a time, and coffee's good, man. All right. Thank you, bro.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Rage of the Age. If you loved today's podcast, make sure to leave a review on the media you're listening through. Secure future episodes by heading over to rageoftheage.com and clicking the RSS feed button. Until next time, this has been Rage of the Age.